the shadow of Santa Claus. There's something about Christmas Eve that fills the air with magic. The snow falls quietly, lights glow in windows, and families huddle around trees and fireplaces, exchanging joy and cheer. But not all stories of Santa Claus end with laughter. In fact, there's a darker tale, one the world doesn't tell anymore. This story takes place in a small town in northern Canada, nestled deep in the woods, where winter lasts far longer than it should. The townsfolk of Pine Hollow knew to respect the dark of winter, especially on Christmas Eve. The elders used to say, "Santa comes for good children, but something else comes for the bad." To most, Santa Claus was jolly, round and kind. But in Pine Hollow, the line between Santa and something darker was thin. So thin that no one risked breaking tradition. The warnings. In a creaky old farmhouse on the outskirts of town lived the Miller family. Paul, his wife Marissa, and their two children, Emma, 10, and Noah, 7. They were new to Pine Hollow, having moved just that summer for Paul's new job. The locals were kind but strange, always whispering old tales and offering odd advice. "Make sure you leave milk and cookies," an elderly grocer told Marissa as she packed her bags. "Santa must be welcomed. And coal," said the butcher with an unsettling grin. "Leave a small piece on the mantel, just in case." "Just in case of what?" Paul had scoffed. "Santa's going to punish us?" "Not Santa," the butcher said, his tone cold. "The shadow." They all laughed about it that night at dinner, but Marissa couldn't shake the unease in their voices. Christmas Eve. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the family had settled into their new home. It was cozy, wooden beams, an ancient fireplace, and windows that looked out into the endless blackness of the forest. Snow had fallen thick all day, muffling every sound. By nightfall, the entire house felt wrapped in cotton silence. "Let's leave cookies for Santa," Emma said excitedly as she set a plate on the mantel. Noah followed with a glass of milk. "You know he's not real, right?" Paul teased, smirking at his kids. Marissa frowned. "Let them enjoy it, Paul. It's tradition." The kids laughed and ran upstairs to bed, their giggles echoing in the halls. That night, as Paul stoked the fire and Marissa set stockings by the tree, she remembered the locals' warnings. With an uneasy laugh, she grabbed a piece of coal from the fireplace and placed it on the mantel beside the milk. "Happy now, Pine Hollow," she muttered to herself. The footsteps. Sometime after midnight, Marissa awoke to the sound of heavy footsteps. Thud, thud, thud. They were faint but deliberate, moving across the roof. Her heart skipped a beat. She shook Paul awake. "Do you hear that?" Paul groaned, turning over. "It's just the snow falling." Thud, thud, thud. No, it wasn't snow. Marissa sat upright, her ears straining. The sound stopped above their bedroom, then started again, this time moving toward the chimney. Her breath caught in her throat. "Paul!" He finally sat up, his sleepy irritation melting into confusion. "What the hell?" They both listened. The footsteps were now inside the chimney. Scrape, shuffle, scrape. "Santa?" A voice called softly from the hallway. It was Noah. Paul bolted upright. "Stay in your room." But it was too late. Noah's small figure appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Did Santa come?" Marissa grabbed him, holding him close. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Go back to bed." Clang. Something heavy dropped in the living room. Paul stood and grabbed a flashlight. "It's probably an animal. I'll check." Marissa's stomach twisted. "Be careful." The living room. The air was colder downstairs, as though the fire had been snuffed out. Paul stepped into the living room, his flashlight sweeping over the tree, the stockings, the cookies. At first, everything looked normal. Then he saw the plate of cookies. Half of them were gone, but the bite marks were wrong. jagged, too large to belong to any person. The milk glass was shattered, a dark smear staining the carpet, and the piece of coal, it was gone. "Marissa," Paul whispered, backing away. "Something's wrong." From the fireplace came a low, guttural sound, like a growl. Paul's flashlight flickered as he aimed it at the chimney. A shape unfolded in the darkness, impossibly tall and thin, its limbs moving like jerking puppets. The thing wore tattered robes of red trimmed with grimy white fur, its face obscured beneath a hood. Its hands were long and bony, nails like rusted icicles, and clutched in one was the piece of coal. It raised its head slowly, revealing a face, or what was left of one. Its skin was stretched thin over its skull, its mouth wide and cracked into a grin that was too large, teeth blackened and sharp. From deep within its chest came a sound, a low, wheezing laugh. "Ho, ho, ho!" Paul stumbled back. "What the hell are you?" The creature stepped closer, its footsteps thunderous. "You didn't believe," it hissed, its voice a winter wind. "You mocked him." It turned its head toward the staircase, where Marissa and Noah now stood frozen in terror. "Bad children get coal. Bad families get me." The escape. "Run!" Paul shouted, grabbing a poker from the fireplace and swinging it. The creature didn't flinch. It caught the poker mid-swing and snapped it in two like a twig. Marissa screamed, yanking Noah toward the front door. Paul grabbed Emma, who had appeared at the top of the stairs, and followed. They burst outside into the freezing snow, but the creature was fast. The door to the house exploded outward, and it emerged into the night, its robes trailing like shadows across the snow. "Where's the car?" Marissa cried, her breath visible in the icy air. They piled into their old truck, Paul fumbling for the keys. Behind them, the creature stood at the edge of the woods, watching. Its glowing eyes bore into them. Finally, the engine roared to life. The truck sped down the icy road, leaving the farmhouse and the monster behind. But as they glanced back, they saw it step into the woods, disappearing into the blackness, the aftermath. The Millers never returned to Pine Hollow. They told no one what had happened, fearing no one would believe them. The farmhouse stood empty, and the locals never spoke of the family again. Years later, a new family moved in just before Christmas. On Christmas morning, the townsfolk found their house abandoned, doors left open, no signs of life. In the living room sat a plate of cookies, half eaten, and on the mantel was a single piece of coal, cracked in half. No one dared touch it, and still, on the coldest, darkest Christmas Eves, the people of Pine Hollow leave milk, cookies, and a piece of coal on their mantels, just in case the shadow of Santa Claus comes again. Father Frost, the frostbite collector. In the farthest reaches of Russia, where the winters are harsher than anywhere else, and daylight fades so early it's barely seen, a village called Vysoky lay buried under snowdrifts taller than men. The village was small, no more than 50 souls, and so isolated it often disappeared from maps. Every year, as December turned to January, they prepared for the coldest nights of the year, nights that brought more than just frostbite. They brought him, the creature they called Dead Moroz, but never allowed. In Russia, the legend of Father Frost is a familiar one, but in Vysoky, his story was not the kind told to children before bedtime. The villagers whispered of an ancient being who roamed the forests and fields, cloaked in snow and shadow. He was no benevolent figure. He did not bring gifts. Instead, he brought death in a bitter kiss of frost, freezing those who dared look for him or call his name. People said he visited during the longest, darkest nights, and if you ever heard him whisper your name from the snowstorm, it was already too late. The stranger who knocked. It was a brutal winter that year, colder than anyone could remember. Windows frosted over within moments, fires struggled to warm their homes, and animals froze in their barns despite the hay and blankets. The village knew what this cold meant. Father Frost was awake, Among the villagers was a stubborn man named Pyotr. He lived on the edge of the forest, just beyond the village proper, where no one else dared build a home. Pyotr had never believed in old tales. He laughed when people told him to move closer to the center of town before the deep winter came. "Superstition and nonsense," he'd scoff. "Frost kills fools, not men like me." On the coldest night of that December, when the wind screamed like something alive, there came a knock on Pyotr's door. It was a slow, deliberate knock. 3 heavy thuds. Pyotr froze by the fireplace, his stew forgotten. No one traveled on nights like these. No one dared leave their homes. Knock, knock, knock. "Who's there?" Pyotr called, his voice trembling despite himself. No answer came. All he could hear was the wind scratching at the walls like nails. Curiosity got the better of him, and against every instinct in his bones, Pyotr crept to the door and peered through the peephole. At first he saw nothing, only the swirling snow. Then a shape moved. It was a figure draped in heavy furs, white as the snow around it. The stranger's face was obscured, but something gleamed from beneath the hood. 2 faint blue lights where eyes should be. "Help!" A deep, rattling voice came from the other side. "I am lost." Pyotr's hand faltered on the lock. A lost man wouldn't survive in this cold. But then he remembered the warnings. "You must not answer. You must not reply." The voice came again. This time it spoke his name. "Pyotr, open the door." Pyotr's blood turned to ice. He hadn't told anyone he was home alone that night. Backing away from the door, he grabbed his axe and threw more wood into the fire, hoping it would keep the cold and whatever stood outside at bay. The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder. Boom, boom, boom. "Let me in, Pyotr." The voice was louder now, and closer. Pyotr stumbled backward, clutching the axe. Shadows moved beneath the door frame, and for the briefest moment, frost crept across the wooden floor toward his feet, spreading from the crack beneath the door. It vanished when he threw the last of his firewood into the stove. The knocking stopped. Pyotr didn't sleep that night. He sat with his back to the door, listening to the wind, praying for daylight. When morning came, he dared to look outside. There were footprints leading away from his house into the forest. Deep, heavy footprints that ended halfway to the trees. After that, there was nothing but undisturbed snow, the disappearing children. Pyotr told no one what had happened, but his neighbors noticed a change in him. He was quieter, haunted. The frostbite on his fingers never healed. A week later, the first child disappeared. Her name was Anya, just 7 years old. Her father found the back door ajar one morning and tiny footprints leading into the woods. It was as though she had walked willingly into the snowstorm. "She must have wandered out during the night," the villagers whispered. "The cold took her." But her mother swore she heard Anya's voice calling to her before dawn. "Mama, let me in. It's cold outside." The woman knew better than to open the door. When she looked through the window, there was no sign of her daughter, only a figure in white standing just beyond the tree line, watching the house. Days later, another child went missing, and another. Each time the story was the same. They vanished without a trace during the coldest, darkest hours, and their voices echoed outside their homes before they were taken.